culture and the place. And that got me lots of places talking, and I ended up getting to be part of a group that wrote a grant to the Nellie Mae Education Foundation to start a Pathways program. So it was heavily led by or is actually led, I think, by the adult ed director at the time, who was seeing lots of students who were dropping out of Sumner, really disengaged, and she was having to sort of deal with them in the adult ed program. And then there was a person from Belfast, Emmanuel Pariser, who's kind of sort of rock star alternative ed person in Maine, who was also helping us. And we wrote this grant to start this program. The idea of the program was to absolutely completely individualized education for every student in the program. So for each student, and it was kind of right at the early days of proficiency based, we were saying, okay, here's what do students need to know to graduate? What does that mean? And then what are all and every way that they can learn those things? And then how do we build individualized plans for each student based around that? And so we started out with 20 students in the first year in this sort of madness. And one of the interesting things that happened was we kind of instantly attracted students who are struggling, really disengaged, like the sort of traditional, what you would sort of see as at-risk students. We also had students who, had some pretty big things going on, like who were pregnant or in their 5th years, and lots of way behind in credits, like really super at-risk students. But we also attracted the sort of valedictorians of the school as well, students who are really just looking for ways to maximize what they wanted to do, like really pushing, could see this as ways to get to things that they couldn't get in school, to open up resources for them. And then we also attracted the homeschool community. So there was a bunch of homeschool students out in the community who saw this as sort of a continuation of how they were doing their elementary experiences. And so we built this program, and all of these students showed up, and we were like, okay, how do we do this? So it wasn't built as necessarily a workforce pathways. And I would say in that sense that this is like the sort of pre-workforce pathway, right? Of just trying to get students really engaged in who they are, what they're interested in, build community, build connection, build excitement, interest, connection to the place around them, like the people around them. And out of that sort of comes pathways. So we get a student like Seamus, and I'm going to turn it over to you, who comes in and starts to talk about what he's interested in and what he wants to do. And we start building learning experiences and opportunities and mentorships and just lots of conversations, even just bringing what he wants into the center of what we're doing and building around that. And so doing that for him while we're doing that for a bunch of other students, and all collectively together in a program. So Seamus, you should talk about what that was like for you.
Yeah, what Val said. I mean, I feel extremely fortunate to have kind of fallen into the Pathways program at the place that it was when I got there, and that, I think it was created for students who aren't learning necessarily in the traditional classroom, and those of us who weren't getting necessarily enough out of the traditional classroom also jumped right on that kind of model. And I think it works great for everybody, in being tailored individually. For me, that meant, rather than sitting through a math class for an entire year, doing all 3 of my kind of required math classes in 1 year with Val, because we were able to run through the curriculum so much quicker at a speed that I was able to learn, because that was a class that was easy for me, if you would. It was great too, in that we weren't just in Pathways all the time. I got to do a number of classes. Actually, as the years went on, I did more and more classes in the traditional classroom setting, and then also supplemented that learning with the Pathways program and the classes we were able to do in Pathways. It really was kind of tailored to the individual. I have no idea how you guys did it, but it really was, because there were a lot of us, and we were all doing different things. For me, that looked like exploring careers. I knew pretty early on what I wanted to do. Coming into high school, I knew what I wanted to do. And so, starting those conversations with game wardens, starting those conversations with search and rescue community, and also getting out there and taking classes. I got my wilderness first responder while I was in high school. as kind of a substitute for a health credit. And so, looking at alternative ways to learn the stuff that we have to learn to get through that high school curriculum, but not necessarily in the traditional way.
Thank you. And I think that's a very tangible example of like, so you have this health credit that you need, we have to tick the box, we have to see it on the transcript, but why not have it be something that's giving you this credential, kind of like Sage chose to do those different credentials, but that also, checks the box, but moves you forward in your pathway. Yeah, that's it. That's a great example. And that there was that flexibility.
And
so yeah.
If I got, and is a lot more engaging, because it was content that I was interested in learning, right? Like it gave me a credential coming out of school, absolutely, but it also, I wasn't as interested in sitting down in a nutrition class as I was learning how to reset open fractures, and so I got to do that.
Right. Yeah. And that goes back to that personalized and kind of meeting you where you are and making sure it's interesting. Yeah. Good. Thanks. I want to shift us now. Kim, you talked a little bit about the gurus, but I'd love to just hear about the role of mentoring. And Sage, I'm gonna ask you. I know you have been a guru, and so if you could just talk about your experience with mentoring, both. I don't know if you had a guru or if that, if you have people that you would identify as mentors, and then also what the experience of being a mentor was like and how that kind of fit in with, it seems like it probably did fit in with what you're doing now. So just would love to hear you talk a little bit about that mentor piece.
Yeah, so I did have a guru that was assigned to me when I was a senior, and my senior year I was a little bit, I don't know how to word it the right way, but I was very sassy and I had quite the attitude. And so Kim, not really knowing me at the time, like she's just this woman trying to help, right? Well, I told her I do not like that many people. And if she gave me a guru that I didn't like, I wasn't going to talk to them. But luckily she gave me the best one, by the way. I wonder why. She was great. And so I immediately had a bond with her. And I knew that if I needed anything, I could just text her or Facebook Messenger and she would respond always. Even if she was busy, she would just be like, hey, I got this, I'll answer you as soon as possible. And so that was really nice. And I didn't really have to rely on her for as many school questions, but it was still nice to be able to talk to someone about how did you handle changes from high school, and we come from this small town and it's just hard and scary. So it was nice to have someone that was just a couple years older to lean on, because kids always say when adults are trying to talk to them, well, you don't know, it's different now. And I totally get that. So it was really nice to have someone that was still going through college, so they couldn't it's the same, we didn't go to the same school, but it was through the University of Maine system. So she was able to help me with that, which was really nice. But then also Sassy Sage started to connect to Kim and let her in and realize she wasn't this terrible person. And so I grew a really great connection with Kim too. And she helped me even on days that I didn't want help. But I knew that I needed it. So we pushed through a bunch of scholarships. I actually got the most scholarships in my class because I just applied for them all, whether I qualified for them or not, because the small town community we live in just wants to give. So that is all thanks to Kim and Project Launch. So I basically feel like I got two mentors from the program, the one that was assigned and Kim. And then when Kim asked me to be a mentor, I told her, no, I was too scared. I couldn't do it. I couldn't be someone's mentor. That was too big. And so the next year she asked me again and she was like, you are more than capable. You help people every day. And so I finally agreed and it went well. I've been a mentor for a few years. Kids are hot and cold though. They'll either lean on you or they won't. And everybody has their own personalized life, so it's fine. But I think that just knowing you have someone to reach out to is a huge piece. And then I ended up working for Project Launch for a few years. And last year I was in person with a lot of the kids. And so although we did assign them gurus, I know that a lot of them, they still reach out to me and want to ask me things. So I kind of feel like I'm their bonus mentor, which is really nice. And I just love being a mentor now, but I was really scared, like, but Project Launch made it not scary, I guess. And that seems silly to say now because I love helping people and I've always have, but it's just a big role to fill.
Thank you. That's very, it's great to see it from both sides. And I wonder if any of the other three panelists have any connection or a story about mentoring or just a component of mentoring in your experience that you would want to share or build on here.
If I could jump in, can I share my screen? I know it's sort of
Yeah.
dorky
Do
to
it.
do this, but I just want to show you. So I'm working right now, and Yvonne and I actually working in this project called Portrait of a Graduate, where I've been having these community-wide conversations about what the purpose of education is, what we want for students. And we've been doing all these surveys and focus groups and like asking lots of students and people like all kinds of stuff about school and the purpose of school. But as I'm working on, this is a project not working with Yvonne, but another project that we're working on. I just have this slide that I was just putting together this morning. And it just made me think about what's going on with mentorship right now. But we have 137 students that we asked from Telstar High School. This is the high school students. How often do you have conversations with adults at school about your future plans? And what you can see is that it's not very often, right? They're not saying all the time. Occasionally, it's mostly rarely, and there's a lot of nevers. And I think like coming back to what we were doing in Sumner Pathways, it wasn't necessarily like a mentorship in that direct way, but I think having an adult who's like connected to you, who knows what you are doing, knows who you are as a learner, and is helping to make those connections between everything that you're doing, and not necessarily just your career, but yourself and who you want to be and your values and goals. Like that seems to be really important, I think, coming out of all of this. There's like the career counseling, and I think Sage, like what you were saying, that's part of it, right? It's just like having someone who like knows you, who is listening to you, who can reflect things back to you or ask you questions or make suggestions, but who's like consistently there. I think that is something that from all this data that we've been collecting and a lot of work that we do, that a lot of students just feel really disconnected from the curriculum around them, from the experiences that they have, even from their communities of like, what are the opportunities for them out there? What are even the possible career tracks? Like they just don't even really know. They seem to be really floating. So I think when I think about mentorship in schools, it's like, how are we talking to students about who they are and what they're interested in? And then also like all of us talking about our own career paths. It's not this straight line, right? And so how do you help them have a career path at the same time as like preparing and navigating for the unknown, for an unknown path? Like that's an interesting thing, but I think a lot of it is just like, how are we talking to students about this, like explicitly having conversations with them and helping them to think about it, understand it. So
thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm hearing two things. One is the role of the adult mentor, and then with the Project Launch model, it's more of the sort of near peer mentor, and I think they both have really important roles. Any other just sort of connections or building on the mentoring idea?
I was thinking just real quickly that in our work and in my own life, I think the role of mentoring, like there is so much of the practical stuff, like Sage was saying, right? Like things that it's nice to have that person to help with those types of things, but the emotional is, as important, maybe more so. But I was thinking, like, I know in our program and in my own life, something that mentors have been able to bring is for the mentee, for the student, I think is sort of like the opportunity to be new. Like we have these schools that, the students, I think of like our island school, and families are known, circumstances are known, backgrounds, older siblings, parents, your socioeconomic, everything is known about you even before you step through the door in kindergarten. And then assumptions get formed based on that unconsciously, probably most of the time. But so we have students going up through the classes and they get messages about what their potential is, what they might be able to achieve, or what their path could look like based on a lot of things that might not reflect the inner part of that person. And I think with our mentor program, I've tried and with my own self I've tried, and the mentors in my life all brought that question to the table. Essentially, we know how you present in the world, but who are you inside? So if there can be a place where a student can be new and can share things that maybe don't exactly line up with an expectation or like a held assumption that somebody has, I think it's such a gift. And a lot of times that comes only through some sort of mentor relationship.
I think that's such an important point. And I know we have a lot of Vinyl Haven folks here and just other small communities. And it's so true. Just a last name we know a lot about our students. We know a lot that's true. And then we know a lot that's maybe myth, or that is not necessarily who that student really is. And it's hard. I know it was hard for me to look at kids with fresh eyes sometimes based on what I thought I already knew. So I think that is a really important point. And thinking about, especially now, the virtual world and how, is that an opportunity for helping people, be seen as new by new people even. I see a couple of comments in the chat, and I should have said this earlier, but please, if you have questions or want to hear more about a certain thing, put it in the chat. We will have a few minutes at the end for questions, or either from the chat or just from people can come off mute and ask questions. So I want to kind of go now towards this idea of collaborations and thinking about this idea of schools and community or business or other organizations kind of collaborating to make these pathways. And I think about, Seamus, what you were doing in high school, and you were still, you weren't old in high school, you were a regular high school age student, I assume, but how you were able to kind of access these other opportunities that weren't necessarily like, they were made available to you in pathways, but they weren't really like part of school, like signing up for a math class was. And then also just in your role now, do you see any opportunity for ways in which like the Park Service or other organizations can work more closely with schools or with kids that have a particular interest?
Yeah, that, I guess for me, it started with, and I don't even know what credit we were using this for, but I did kind of a career exploration in my first year, where my kind of goal project was to explore certain jobs and create a binder of what those jobs entailed, what it took to get to those positions, what their salaries were, what the qualification requirements were. And so I looked at firefighters, I looked at law enforcement, at EMS, and at search and rescue. And in doing that, I attended a meeting with MDI Search and Rescue, which is the volunteer organization on Mount Desert Island. And through that first meeting, which I went to just to kind of learn more about the organization, they were really open to 16-year-old me doing some trainings and working on skills. And it was right kind of up my alley, if you would. And so from there, I didn't look back. That's 8 years now of being a volunteer with the search and rescue team. And I think there's a lot of room for collaboration. I think about it a lot as a ranger on the island, knowing, students who are there, have grown up around the national park, might not necessarily know what we're doing or the amount of opportunities the National Park Service can pose, and that you can work from here to Alaska, to the Virgin Islands, to Guam, to where, anywhere the National Park Service has parks. It's a little challenging with the federal government in terms of career wise, but I feel really fortunate for being able to work with the Warden Service and with MDI Search and Rescue, even in high school. And I think those partnerships can be invaluable in terms of motivating students, because you're actually seeing the job while you're in high school. It gives you something to work towards.
Right. Makes it real. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. And I know, Kim, you mentioned this right before the pandemic, these 100 people coming out, to kind of learn more about workforce pathways, but just wonder if you have any anything that you would want to add to that idea about like the types of collaborations? It's such a big topic, but like I just feel this hunger on the part of students, teachers, and businesses and communities, and it's just so hard to like find that connection. And I do think there's a role for outside organizations like yours and Val's and even the Island Institute to kind of help with making those connections. But do you have anything along those lines that you would want to highlight for the work that you have in mind for Project Launch, that recognizing that it hasn't really happened yet because of the pandemic?
Well, I guess just off the cuff, I would say that I think actually something like Val's program or Project Launch, Island Institute, it's maybe not the only way that those connections can happen, but it's a primary vehicle for them to happen, because at least I look at our school, my immediate example, they are really, really overwhelmed. The guidance department is short-staffed. There are so many needs that are happening in the high school, just basic, immediate, critical needs on a daily basis. And the challenge of trying to create an additional support for students or something that might be an amazing opportunity for them, I have yet to find an educator who isn't so excited about it, but the bandwidth that they have to pull it off can be very limited. So I feel like that community school partnership or, community program partnership like ours with the school is ideal in trying to have that happen. And, we can serve as the connector between the school, the academics, like with the apprenticeships and internships that we had planned and hopefully will still happen. We were trying to wrap them around academic credits whenever we could. So the school needs to be a partner, we need to be a connector, and then the employer also needs to be, on board with that. And so I think, it's still something we're excited about. I think it's really critical. And but yeah, I guess that's all. I think the kind of organizations that we're talking about today have such an important role, and it almost can't happen without them.
Val, thanks, Kim. Val.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think in our program, our jobs, we weren't teaching, we were doing some classes with collaborating with students, but we didn't have full-time teaching schedules. Our job was to listen to what students were interested in, find the connections in the community, and then figure out how to make that fit. Like we were the sort of the glue of that. And there's a lot of work there in terms of thinking about the system. So, Seamus got to do that searching the wilderness first responder, thing as a health class. I had to convince the school that that was appropriate way to do a health class, right? That he didn't have to do nutrition, that he could do this thing that was way over and above what was happening in a health class, and it was still going to count. And I had to sit in those meetings and fight for those things constantly, because we just have this pressure that every kid has to get the same things in high school and they have to do it the same way. And if they don't do it this way, then it doesn't count. And so there's a lot of work there that is just living in the world that we're in right now of making the space for those things and the systems, like you were saying, Kim. It's it's not just even having the time. It's fighting this sort of pressure that we have that's resisting this stuff, that constantly. So we were getting in that space and tweaking and advocating and making and finding and helping the people in the community understand what the students needed and how to make that work for them too, and how to sort of, there's a lot to that. So I think we have to sort of first decide that this is what we want to do. And then we have to really look at the real constraints and barriers that make it almost impossible to happen organically. And then to build into that and think about how really is it okay if every student learns the same things but in a different way? Are we really actually comfortable with that?
Yeah, and how do we get the systems that prevent it from happening, even if we say we want it? Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, I have two big topics that they're too big. We could do a whole panel on both of them, but they have been themes that have come up a lot over the course of of these past 2 days. And so I just want to put them out there and just see if you have any connections. It's almost like just sort of word association. But today the focus was really a lot of content, deliberate content on looking at equity issues. And our keynote this morning was really just talking about how we have to prepare for a more diverse, world. The state of Maine has to become more diverse if we're going to just continue to be able to thrive as a state. And I feel like whether we're talking about racial diversity or diversity of gender or diversity of urban, rural, or whatever it might be, but that there's something about this pathway idea and this idea of getting kids sort of thinking about what they want to do and having that chance to have practical experiences before it's, time for college or time to enter the workforce. And just would love to hear any anecdotes or stories or just connections to that idea of like how this approach is sort of an equity approach as well as, sort of a practical sort of career approach. So I know it's a big convoluted question, but does anybody have anything? Sage, I see your eyebrows up. I don't know if there's anything that comes to mind or not. Totally fine. It is a big one. And maybe I just sort of answered my own question, but I think I feel like I know that schools in particular are bombarded with so many initiatives, and they have to be like, you need a committee for this and you need a committee for that. And certainly this DEIJ work is kind of upon all of us, as it should be, but that this approach is maybe one way of thinking about doing that, and that it doesn't have to be this separate piece of work that a whole different sort of group of people have to work on, that they can really be sort of one and the same. So I'm gonna take us to the next thing, which is close to wrapping up, and then we'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A. But just I'd like to sort of end on the positive and ask each of you to just sort of give me like what your blue sky vision is for this idea of education and workforce pathways, and whether it's your own blue sky, like your own personal life, or what you would like to see, like, for us, as a state or these coastal communities, but just like what could this look like if things were going to go really well in a few years? How could it be? And I guess I'll ask Val to kick us off.
Yeah, so I've talked a lot about the work that I did at Pathways in Sumner, but I actually not teaching or working in that program anymore. I work as a consultant and, all around Maine, and we are mostly working in rural schools. And a lot of what we're trying to do is to try to think about the role of schools in community vitality. And I think when we were talking about these little tiny schools that are all over the place, that we're all in these communities that are worried that young people are leaving, or that the communities are emptying out, or that, the economy is changing, or, what is the future? I think one thing that I feel kind of excited about is that we have been able to be in some places where people have been having some really interesting and real conversations about like, who are we and who do we want to be, and what is the role of young people in our communities? And what is our collective role in our communities to engage with young people, and how might we start to do that? I think there's still a lot of work to do in that place, but it is happening. And one of the bright spots for me in Maine is that, we're so tiny. We don't have districts of like 30,000 kids with like 5,000 administrators. We have schools in each of our communities, and we have so much opportunity just to connect inward with ourselves, like to really think about what we want to do and who we want to be. And so I do feel optimistic about that. I think times are hard, but people are asking hard questions and pushing back in hard ways. And I think starting to make connections in some ways, in some places, in some bright spots, to how we need to like stop just putting kids in schools in these silos and getting them out and start really kind of pulling them in and thinking about them as, the future of our communities. So I do find some optimism out there in these crazy times.
Thanks, Val. Sage, how about you? What do you see that's exciting or looks like a bright spot?
Well, like the little bit that we've already been able to do in our school, I mean, most of our work has been on hold because of COVID, but like last year we do this thing where we give hoodies at the end of every year And if like a student is going to University of Maine, we give them a University of Maine hoodie. And it's like, we've got your back. But this year we were able to get just basic hoodies made up, a project launch for those kids that are in the workforce that were still involved in our program, even though maybe not specifically each session had to do with what they would do, because it still is leaning a little bit more towards college kids. But like, it was just nice to be able to include anybody in the class that wanted to, instead of just the kids that wanted to go to college. So I just think it's nice to be able to include everybody, and that everybody can get the same help and support and mentors that the other kids can too. So we're not discluding.
This is music to my ears. And I think that's another, I didn't really mention it, but that idea of workforce pathways, one of the reasons that I really locked onto that term is because I think it does help with this idea of college and or career, that there are all these different very valid pathways. And I'll just share briefly, you know, when I was a school counselor for many, many years, it was mostly in the 90s. And there was this, like, I mean, school counselors were taught like, everyone's going to college. You need to prepare everyone for college. Even if they don't go, they need to apply. They need to be, you know, be told that they can do it. And that's what you have to do. And that just sounded so good and sounded so inclusive. And like, I wanted to do that. And we're sort of now realizing that like college is a wonderful, beautiful way to go for a lot of people, but there's also lots of other wonderful, beautiful ways that aren't college that are just as valid. And I think a lot of the workforce struggles and all the help wanted signs and things like that we're seeing everywhere is part of that. You know, one of the results of that idea that there's this one way that everyone can benefit from. So I just back to the practical of like the hoodies for the kids who aren't necessarily going to college, but are going on to do something else that's really important and valuable and needed in their community. That those are equal. They're not one isn't better than the other necessarily, as long as it's a good fit for the kids. So that's a great example. Thank you. Seamus, what about you? What do you see that's hopeful or that's exciting?
For me, I'm a few years removed from being in high school in the Pathways program, which has drastically changed from the days that I was there. I think, you know, I got a text from Val earlier this week that was like, hey, do you want to be on this panel and talk about pathways, which is awesome. And I think the bright spot for me is that these conversations are still happening, and that Val's out there still doing this work, and that everybody else who's in this session and has been here the last couple of days, like that there's momentum behind it just in general. Because I think if I can touch back to your last question about kind of diversity and inclusion, and like one of the benefits of having a pathways program or having these more individualized learning experiences is that we can be inclusive to everybody regardless of kind of their socioeconomic status, their background, the path they're trying to go on, if they're going to college, if they're going into the workforce, is that all of those diverse individuals can have a way to learn to their fullest potential. And I think that's something that we saw definitely at Sumner, you know, folks coming from the traditional kind of K-8 school and from homeschool, and that everybody was able to push themselves to be as great as they could be. But the bright spot for me is that we're here having these conversations.
Great.
It's awesome.
And thank you for saying yes and being here to represent. Kim, how about you?
I was thinking that for me, like kind of a backdoor thing and a little tricky at times, but something that I'm actually excited about and feel positive about is the amount of students that are pushing back against the traditionally held paths, you know, or the models that we have for them. And it can be challenging because they a lot of times will ask questions or bring up things that I'm not quite prepared. I don't always have the answer for that, you know, like it's sort of like College Bound. That was a pretty easy thing to figure out. And that path anyway, you know, what you needed to do. But I have a lot of students that just say, you know, no, I don't want to do that, or I'm not going to do that, or that doesn't make sense for me, or I don't want to do it that way, or I have seen my, you know, dad, my granddad and great granddad do it. I'm not doing it. And so I feel like optimistic in that I feel like the push is coming from the younger people. almost forcing us to revisit and redefine what a path, out of high school looks like, what those transitions are about. And sometimes I guess the labels again, right? Maybe difficult kids is maybe what they're called sometimes, or challenging us, but I feel happy about that. I'm like, yes, awesome. Like, you have a voice inside you, you're listening to it, and I have no idea what it's going to look like, but the fact that they can show up and state what they don't want to do, for me, is a starting point that is as exciting as a student that shows up and is really clear.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that's such a good point. Okay. Thank you all. It's good to have the like tingly, bubbly, like this is going to be great. We do have a few questions that have been put into the chat. So I'd love to just kind of throw them out there. Some of them maybe we don't have the answer to, but we can look for them. But one of the questions was just, do we know how many schools in Maine have programs like Pathways and Launch? And I'm not sure if they're tracked, or if either Val or Kim, if you know, I don't know. But does anybody have that information or know if that's tracked information?
Val, would you say not many?
Yeah, I'd say not many. I mean, there are bits and parts of things here and there, like the
Right.
Skippers program. I think maybe you can
Yep.
speak to it a little bit. The Maine Forest Collaborative here and there. There definitely are programs in places, but I don't know about the Sumner Pathways thing. That I haven't seen that anywhere in, in other places that I've been around, and not specifically about Launch, but there's like parts of things here and there, and there's conversations, but it's definitely not ubiquitous.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's going to change. It seems like it's going to have to. Thanks. Another question, and actually a resource. I don't know, Christine McAllister, are you still here? If you are, would you come off mute? And yes?
I'm still here. Sorry, I'm having
great.
internet connectivity issues.
Okay,
So I
no.
have to keep my video off.
Yeah, I'd love to we just have another minute or so, but I'd love to just have you put in a plug for the apprenticeship program, and just very briefly talk about what it is, and also how it could be applied to some of these really small school settings potentially, or how students could access that.
Yeah, so I think this has been a really good conversation, and everything that has been discussed, I think we've been talking about, is how to create pathways and other options, and that it doesn't have to be school to college, and it could be both. You can work and go to college and get a degree or get a certificate. And so that's what apprenticeships are. So I work for the Maine Department of Labor's Apprenticeship Program. And so what we do, registered apprenticeships are nationally recognized. So students, students or apprentices, go to work for an employer. They get paid while they work. They get the training on the job, and then they also get classroom education. It can be a year, up to 5-year program. It depends on what it is. And so what we are trying to do is raise awareness of apprenticeships and opportunities, and make those connections between employers, schools, and individuals that might be interested in that. So that's a super quick intro. But I think all these about individualized pathways and just exploring other options, I think those are all great conversations. So I put my email in the chat. Anyone's welcome to reach out to kind of continue that conversation and see what connections we can build to really help develop the workforce in Maine.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. And I'm sorry. I think, okay, good. Yeah, great to know about, and great to sort of track how that's going to really start to become more of a feature, I think, for this as we move more into this way of doing that connection between education and workforce. Okay, we're just about at time, so I'm going to stop the conversation here and just want to virtually clap or snap or whatever. But thank you so much to our 4 panelists. Just really appreciate your time and perspective. And I feel like this is so many of these conversations that we've had over the last 2 days are kind of jumping off points and that connecting the dots piece. But just really hope to stay in touch and keep this conversation going as we move forward. I want to now tell you that if you have the bandwidth and want to just have a chance to do a little reflecting and a little like pulling it all together, to head over to Zoom link 1, which I'm putting in the chat. That is where we will do our closing and have a few minutes to reflect and tie things up. But just again, thank you so much for participants for being here. Great questions. And to our panelists, really appreciate your perspective. And I'll see you over in Zoom link 1 for those of you who are heading that way. So thank you so much.